The Atlanta Hawks had one goal this offseason, make their team better around Trae Young. Dejounte Murray traded to the Atlanta Hawks for 4 draft picks. In total, 3 first-round picks and a pick swap in 2026, according to Adrian Wojnarowski. Now, Dejounte Murray, very good player, very underrated player around the league. This kicks off, obviously, a rebuild for the Spurs. Which angle would you like to take this from the Spurs perspective or the Hawks perspective?
First of all, I did this documentary series with the San Antonio Spurs SB Nation page on the day that the Dejounte Murray trade happened, which is hilarious to me. But I want to take this from the Hawks standpoint first, because going into the offseason, the thing that I said was most interesting about the Hawks was that they had to upgrade the roster. It was clear they needed to upgrade the roster. This was they went from being the 5th team in the Eastern Conference in 2021. They were the 5th seed. They beat the Knicks. The Philadelphia 76ers throw up all over themselves and they get to make the conference final. But basically they finished 5th in the regular season standings in the East, and they did nothing. And then they got passed by Boston, and they got passed by Miami, and they got passed by, I believe it was the Cleveland Cavaliers during that season. So Atlanta just kind of stood pat for a while. And then ultimately they ended, Chicago also passed them. So they stood pat, and then they fell down because everyone else improved around them. So Atlanta going into this offseason was clear they needed to upgrade the roster in some way, shape, or form, which is why it was interesting that I saw John Collins being on the trade block for the last 2 weeks or so, because John Collins represents what is at the time like the second best player on the Atlanta Hawks. And they upgraded the roster to get a number 2 star, better than John Collins, certainly. Like Dejounte Murray is probably better served as a number 3, especially if Trae Young is going to be your number 1. But still, it's a step in the right direction for the Atlanta Hawks that they were able to get a true number 2, a second all-star caliber player to go alongside Trae Young. And they didn't really have to give up a whole lot to make it happen. Obviously, those draft picks will represent future value, but it's a trade that they definitely should have made and say to hell with the future draft picks, including one of them, which they got from the Hornets to move down. Yeah. They traded their first round pick this year for Hornets first round pick next year. And that's just a bonus pick from this year. So I think that's a win for Atlanta. Obviously those draft picks could mess up for them. One of them, or I think the 2 are both unprotected, which is like, if you get lucky and win the lottery, you could have saved those picks, but they didn't do that. But
they're going to be a playoff team in the Eastern Conference. So we can already project that those picks are going to be in the bottom half of the draft regardless. But for the Atlanta Hawks to make this trade, it is obviously an upgrade to their roster. The only thing is, like, does this make them a championship contender out of the Eastern Conference, or certainly at least an Eastern contender? Obviously, they were in the Eastern Conference Finals just 2 years ago. And whether we want to debate on did they deserve to really be up there, they were there. And that was kind of the Trae Young coming out party. Now you get Dejounte Murray in there. And like I said, he's an all-star. He's a guy that is in 2021, he was a 21 per game scorer. Anytime you acquire a guy that's putting up 20 points per game, that's going to be an improvement to your roster. Now, I do have my questions, though, from this perspective. You have a team now led by 2 small guards, Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. Anytime I've seen a team constructed around 2 small guards, it's kind of so-so for the team in terms of their actual ability to be a true contender, especially when you're talking the Eastern Conference, when a lot of the better teams in the conference are built on size. Like, obviously Giannis Antetokounmpo, is Clint Capella or John Collins going to step up to stop Giannis from driving to the bucket each and every time? You have Joel Embiid, who is an absolute monster. And of course, the Hawks can say we beat the 76ers a couple of years ago, so we can handle Embiid. But no, let's be real here. Joel is going to be a problem for you each and every night with this particular roster construction. Boston, a team that's very long, very lengthy, and has a lot of switching capability. And by the way, I am upset that Dejounte Murray went for this trade package, because I do think it was a doable trade package for the Boston Celtics. So a little bit spurned by that, not going to lie. I feel like Dejounte Murray was gettable by them and certainly a lot of other teams. So I do appreciate the balls by the Atlanta Hawks to go out there and acquire Murray. Now I'm going to touch on the San Antonio Spurs perspective of things. This signals full-scale rebuild, does it not?
Ooh, well, it depends. I mean, I assume that next year they're going to try and get a top pick in the draft, but they can turn that around relatively quickly. It's not like they're going to go 3 years of being at the top of the draft. Devin Vassal's now going to slide into a starting role for the San Antonio Spurs, and they're not going to be very good, but they're also not going to be like catastrophically bad. This isn't like a 5 years of being terrible situation for San Antonio. I think what this signifies is we got a deal that we probably couldn't refuse, and sure, we know we're going to be bad next year, but ultimately they got Dejounte Murray for the 30th pick in the NBA draft, and 6 years later they turned him into a 17 point a game scorer who they can trade for another draft pick sometime at the deadline or in the next month or so, and 3 first-round picks. That's pretty good value given where you started. How long
do we have to like a Jakob Poeltl trade? It comes down the chute.
Trading pieces that are there for whatever else you get in return. They can keep trading pieces and keep getting picks altogether. I think it was just an offer they couldn't refuse.
Yeah, well, you can refuse any offer. That's the crux of this thing. You can refuse any offer. Is this necessarily a deal you want to make? And I guess it comes down to, do you think that Dejounte Murray is a transformational talent for your team? He's a good talent, and it's certainly a number 2 or a number 3 on a competing team. And I think that's obviously why the Atlanta Hawks made this deal, to make him their number 2. You mentioned you were surprised that John Collins was even in trade discussions. I believe it goes back to something you once said on the podcast a while ago about John Collins. He's one of those players that you trade to get players better than John Collins. So that's why you're going to at least put him out there. You're at least going to put him like a worm on a fish hook. You're going to see what's interest for a guy like John Collins. Now with Dejounte in town, I look at this Hawks team and I think they're probably as good as, well, they're better than like the Bulls, I would say. And the Bulls are, going to be a playoff team next year, probably as good as the 76ers. And we'll talk about the 76ers in another segment. As far as this current iteration of the 76ers and what I'm seeing, are they as good as the Brooklyn Nets? I mean, at least last year's version of the Brooklyn Nets, they're probably as good as them, assuming Dejounte brings over everything that he had from San Antonio over to Atlanta. And then it's going to come down to their first round matchup. The Miami Heat. Where do they stack up against the Heat? Because Trae Young had one of his worst set of games against the Miami Heat defense last year. Hey, this takes a lot of pressure off of Trae Young, too, to not be the ball dominant guy that's leading the entire Atlanta Hawks offense. Now you have a guy that could spread the ball around a little, because also, too, Dejounte, 9.2 assists per game. So this is a playmaking point guard as well. That open space, that ball spacing, that is going to be huge, being able to take this Atlanta Hawks team to at least, I would say, a top 4 team potentially in the Eastern Conference, if everything works out right how it's supposed to, if the names play up to their ability.
Yeah, this is the interesting place that we find ourselves in, because you mentioned championship contender at the beginning and the benefiting from the Sixers throwing up all over themselves in 2021 and getting to be one of the Final 4 teams. So this is an interesting point where clearly they are better than they were yesterday. Like, obviously, if you just purely upgrade Dejounte Murray for Danilo Gallinari, you are a better team tomorrow. Like, they are a better team than they were yesterday, but they're also not a championship contender. But there was also nothing they could do to become a championship contender in one season, simply because Trae Young is not that caliber of player. Trae Young's a very, very good player. He's just not as good as Joel Embiid, Kevin Durant, Giannis,
but he
Jimmy
doesn't have
Butler.
to be. He doesn't have to be to win a championship.
I think Trae Young is probably more of a number 2 on a championship team. But again, that also comes down to the small guard thing, and it comes down to the Hawks roster construction. I think to be more confident, you would need Trae Young as a number 2 on a champion team.
But that's not available. That's not an option right now.
Exactly. So the Hawks are getting better, and they'll probably not play in the play-in game like last year. That'll probably be an improvement year over year. And you could argue Murray only has 2 years before he hits free agency, and they need to maximize that window.
Huge. That's great that he has 2 years. That's why Dejounte was such a desirable trade asset. You already justified moving the first round picks, given that Dejounte is a controllable asset in his prime through the next couple of years. So this is the right move to make for the Atlanta Hawks. Will it pay dividends for them in this upcoming season? That is something that we'll just have to see play out on the court, but they are better today than they were yesterday. But Slump Busters, go ahead and let us know in the comments, how much better do you think the Atlanta Hawks got? Are they a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference? Are they going to be competing for an NBA title, or at least the Eastern Conference Finals this year? Want to know your thoughts? Leave a like on this video, and of course, hit that subscribe button. From Juju Talk Sports and Kyle Better. We'll see you next time.